So this morning we are returning to John chapter 10, and we'll be looking at the second statement that Jesus makes in this chapter that John records for us. And just like the previous few weeks, I will once again warn you that I like the Gospel of John. And as a result of preparing for this particular message, I went down the rabbit hole a few times. So hopefully I will not keep us from going too far over again. Once again, no promises. So in John chapter 10, Jesus makes a second statement, which follows right after he told the Pharisees that I am the gate. So in John chapter 10, he shifts gears a little, and he makes a second statement, which is found in John chapter 10, verse 11. And we'll be looking at verses 11 through 21 in your Bible. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters them. The man runs away because he is hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and they shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to pick it up again. This command I received from my Father. The Jews who heard these words were again divided. Many of them said, "He is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him?" But others said, these are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? May the Lord bless the reading of his holy word. Now we also have to understand there's a lot to unpack in these verses and in these statements. So when we look at why Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, we have to understand exactly what the role of the shepherd is. When I was a child in Sunday school, they would often say that the shepherd takes care of the sheep. If one gets lost, he goes and finds it. He protects the sheep. But that really isn't all that a shepherd is supposed to do. That's an oversimplification of the role of a shepherd. And so when we think of Jesus as the good shepherd, we have to understand exactly what is the shepherd's job. Well, shepherding is considered one of the oldest occupations in the world. Some of the roles of the shepherd have remained the same since it was first started thousands of years ago. And the role of shepherds is this: to guide the sheep from one pasture to the next. It was the duty of the shepherd to keep the flock intact, to keep sheep from wandering away as they moved from pasture to pasture. The shepherd was to guide the flock to market when it was time for the shearing of the wool or the selling of the sheep for meat. And obviously, as we mentioned before, is to protect it from predators. However, shepherds were also responsible for milking the sheep. I did not know that. And they were also charged of making cheese out of that milk. And because of this, because they guided their flocks from pasture to pasture, they were very nomadic people. And they moved constantly, and as a result, they lived separately from society. Sometimes shepherds would even group their flocks into one large flock in order for them to share the responsibilities of watching the flock. Shepherds also had to be very tough because herding was only done in rugged, mountainous areas. For the lowlands and river valleys were often used and reserved for farming. And so when they moved from pasture to pasture over rugged rugged mountainous terrain. They had to keep an eye out to make sure none of the sheep got lost or fell off a ridge side. But they also, when they finally got to a pasture, they also had to make sure the pasture didn't contain any poisonous plants that the sheep might eat. They also had to constantly check for sick, injured sheep, and they had to provide basic medical treatment for them. They also had the responsibility of checking on ewes who were getting ready for birth, and also provide assistance when needed during the birth of new sheep. Even them, they even also sometimes would have to dock or cut off the tails of the young lambs to make sure they didn't, the feces didn't get caked on the backside and ruin the wool. But then they also had to make sure the sheep were watered, and sheep require large amounts of water, so they were having to constantly move the flock from water source to water source. And obviously they also were responsible for retrieving a sheep when it managed to wander away from the flock. Man, shepherds had to do a lot, didn't they? Much more than watching over the flock, protecting the flock, and making sure they were fed and watered. I mean, man, they had to do a lot. So when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, he is putting this image into the minds of his listeners. He is doing this in order so people would better understand his explanation of why he is the good shepherd. As with all of Jesus' statements, there is a lot to unpack in it. And so we're only going to focus on a few of the main things that Jesus said in his statements. When he talked about, I am the good shepherd in verses 11 through 21. And to really understand why Jesus is the good shepherd, we first have to understand the role of the hired hand. Immediately after Jesus makes this statement, he says the hired hand doesn't do anything for the flock. When the wolf comes, he runs away and leaves the flock to the wolf. And it is quite obvious why the hired hand flees at the sight of the wolf. Frankly, because it's not my job. How many times have we heard that? How many times have we heard that statement, it is not my job, or we have even said it to ourselves that it is not my job? You see, the hired hand, they are employed to take care of the sheep. Therefore, they earn wages by watching. And in their minds, they're only paid to just watch the sheep. They do not do all the other stuff that a shepherd normally does. Why? Because it's not their job. But besides the fact that it's not their job, because they're only hired to just watch the sheep, there is no intimate connection between the one who has been hired and the flock that they watch over. For the hired person sees them not as his sheep, for he does not own any of the sheep in the flock. Rather, they are merely paid for watching over somebody else's sheep. And therefore, they are no longer interested in taking risks when it comes to